Maybe it's best you just go home, Dana. You don't fit in here. Mrs. Vance's voice cut through the freezing night air like a knife. She stood in the doorway of her massive estate, her emerald velvet gown glowing under the porch lights, looking at the black grease stain on my dress with pure disgust. My hands were still shaking and covered in engine grime from saving a stranger's life in a snowstorm. My sensible navy dress was soaked through with slush. I had arrived late to my son's mother-in-law's gala, expecting a little grace, but finding only cold-hearted rejection instead. If you enjoy stories about karma and silent revenge, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. But let me back up and tell you how a 60-year-old grandmother named Dana Farrington ended up being humiliated on a porch in Asheville, North Carolina, and how that humiliation turned into the sweetest revenge of my life. I adjusted the rearview mirror, but I wasn't really looking at my hair or my makeup. I was looking at the fear in my own eyes. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had turned white, blending in with the pale winter sky hanging over Asheville. I took a deep breath, the kind that rattles in your chest, and told myself, Dana, you can do this. It's just one night. It's for Melvin. But my stomach knew better. My stomach was doing flips like I was about to walk into a lion's den, not a family Christmas party. And in a way, that is exactly what it was. I pulled the sun visor down to check my lipstick one last time. The shade was dusty rose, the same one I've worn for 10 years. It felt safe. Safe is what I needed tonight, because I was driving straight into a world where I didn't belong. I was heading to my son's mother-in-law's mansion. Most people get excited about Christmas parties. They think about eggnog, carols, and seeing family. But this wasn't that kind of party. This was a performance. My daughter-in-law, Pearlie, and her mother, Mrs. Vance, didn't throw parties for fun. They threw parties to show people how much better they were than everyone else. To be honest, I almost didn't come. I almost called Melvin and told him I had the flu, but I couldn't do that to him. My son Melvin is a good man. He works hard, but ever since he married Pearlie, I feel like I've been losing him, inch by inch. He married into a family that comes from old money, the kind of people who have names for their summer homes and separate forks for their salad. I'm just Dana Farrington. I worked at a library for 30 years. I drive a 2014 sedan with a dent in the bumper. I don't speak their language, and they never let me forget it. The invitation this year was the worst one yet. Usually, I get a card in the mail. It's cold and formal, but at least it's a card. This year, I didn't get a card. I got a phone call yesterday morning. It wasn't even Melvin who called. It was Pearlie. Dana, she had said, her voice tight and rushed like she was talking to a telemarketer she wanted to hang up on. We need you to come tomorrow night. The nanny came down with strep throat, and we're in a bind. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't say, we'd love to see you, Mom. She said, we're in a bind. I was planning to come anyway, Pearlie. I had told her, trying to keep my voice steady. I haven't seen the boys in a month. Right, well, she sighed, and I could hear the stress in her voice. This isn't just the usual Christmas Eve gathering. Mother is turning it into a business gala. We have a very important potential investor coming, a VIP mystery guest. Actually, if we secure this investment, it changes everything for the family business. If we don't, well, let's just say Mother is on the warpath. I had paused, holding the phone against my ear, feeling that familiar sting of being an afterthought. So, you want me to come to watch the children? Exactly. Pearlie said, sounding relieved I understood my place so quickly. We need the adults to be free to mingle and impress the investor. We can't have the twins running around underfoot. If you could just keep them in the nursery upstairs and maybe help the catering staff if they get overwhelmed, that would be a lifesaver. You know how Mother gets about clutter. I know, I whispered. Great. 7 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. Mother is already anxious. And then she hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the phone. I wasn't a guest. I was the backup help. I was the unpaid babysitter who was being allowed into the house because I was useful, not because I was wanted. It hurt. I won't lie to you, it hurt like a slap in the face. I raised 3 children on a librarian's salary after my husband passed. I taught them manners. I taught them to say please and thank you and to look people in the eye. I didn't raise Melvin to treat people like staff, but when you marry into a family like the Vances, sometimes you get swallowed whole. So why was I sitting in my car, putting on lipstick and driving into a snowstorm? Because I love my son. I could hear it in Pearlie's voice, the desperation. If this VIP investor didn't sign on, things were going to get ugly in that big house. And when things get ugly for Pearlie and her mother, they take it out on Melvin. They make him feel small. They make him feel like he's not providing enough, even though he works 60 hours a week. If I could go there, keep the grandkids quiet, and wash a few dishes so that Melvin could have a peaceful night, I would do it. That's what mothers do. We swallow our pride, so our children don't have to swallow theirs. I looked down at my dress. It was a navy blue wrap dress I bought at a department store 3 years ago. It was clean, pressed, and sensible. But I knew exactly what Mrs. Vance would do when she saw it. She would do that little scan, eyes starting at my shoes, traveling up to my hair, and then she would give a tight, pitying smile. "Oh, Dana," she would say, "so practical." I gripped the wheel again, shifting the car into drive. The engine hummed, a little rattle coming from the exhaust pipe. I hoped the old girl would make it. The weather report said snow was coming in fast, a real mountain storm. The sky was already turning that bruised, purple color that means heavy flakes are about to fall. "Just be invisible," I whispered to the empty car. "Walk in the back door. Go straight to the nursery. Hug the grandbabies. Don't talk to the rich people. Don't embarrass Melvin." It sounded like a simple plan. I pulled out of my driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. My house is small, a little bungalow with a porch that needs painting, but it's warm. It's filled with photos and books and memories. Leaving it to go to the Vance estate felt like leaving a sanctuary to go into a battlefield. The drive to their part of town usually took 40 minutes. They lived in the Golden Horseshoe, a gated community where the driveways were heated, and the security guards checked your ID like you were trying to cross a border. It was a different world, a world where money was the only language that mattered, and if you didn't speak it fluently, you were deaf and dumb to them. As I drove, I thought about the VIP mystery guest Pearlie had mentioned. I wondered what kind of person commanded that much fear and respect. Probably some tech billionaire or a real estate tycoon who looked at people like me and saw a statistic, not a person. I didn't care about the investor. I just hoped they would sign the check quickly so Mrs. Vance would relax and maybe, just maybe, invite me to sit at the table for 5 minutes. But I knew better. Tonight, I was second-class citizens. Tonight, I was Melvin's mother, the one from the other side of town. I turned onto the main highway, and the first flakes of snow hit my windshield. Big, wet flakes that stuck to the glass. I turned on my wipers, the rhythmic swish-swish, sounding like a clock ticking down. I checked my watch. I was making good time. If I kept a steady pace, I'd be there by 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. That would please them. Being early showed respect, even if they didn't show it back. I had no idea that the universe had other plans for me tonight. I had no idea that this drive wasn't going to be just a commute. It was going to be a test. As the snow started to fall harder, blurring the road ahead, I tightened my scarf. I was ready to be the invisible woman. I was ready to be the doormat I was ready to do whatever it took to keep the peace. But as I navigated the slick roads, heading toward the humiliation waiting for me at the mansion, I didn't know that I was about to meet someone who would change the way I saw myself forever. I pressed the gas pedal, driving straight into the storm, my heart pounding a rhythm of dread against my ribs. For Melvin, I said again. Just for Melvin. The snow wasn't just falling anymore. It was driving hard against the windshield, coming down in thick, heavy sheets that turned the world outside my car into a blur of white and gray. If you live in Asheville or anywhere near the Blue Ridge Mountains, you know how quickly the weather can turn on you. 1 minute it's a flurry, and the next you're gripping the steering wheel, praying your tires hold onto the asphalt as you wind around those mountain curves. I leaned forward, squinting through the glass, my wipers working furiously on the highest setting. Swish thump, swish thump. The rhythm was the only sound in the car besides the heater blasting hot air that never seemed to quite reach my feet. I glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. 6:35 p.m. My heart gave a painful little squeeze. The GPS on my phone was mounted to the vent, glowing blue in the dark cabin. It said I was still 25 minutes away. That put me at the Vance estate right at 7 p.m., maybe 7:05 p.m. if the traffic at the gate was bad. No, 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 I whispered, tapping the steering wheel nervously. Don't be late. Please don't be late. I could already hear Mrs. Vance's voice in my head. It wasn't a yell. Mrs. Vance never yelled. Yelling was for common people. She used a tone that was quiet, sharp, and cold, like a knife made of ice. "Dana," she would say, looking at her diamond-encrusted watch. "We said 7 o'clock. Punctuality is a sign of respect, dear. But I suppose we can't expect everyone to understand the value of other people's time." She would say it in front of the caterers. She would say it in front of the guests. And she would say it in front of my son, Melvin, who would look down at his shoes and shift his weight, too afraid to tell his mother-in-law to lay off. I couldn't bear the thought of giving her more ammunition. She already thought I was unrefined and uneducated. If I was unreliable, too, I'd never hear the end of it. I'd be the topic of conversation at her bridge club for the next 6 months. I pressed a little harder on the gas, but the back tires spun for a fraction of a second on a patch of black ice. My stomach dropped. I eased off immediately. Better late than dead, I told myself. But the anxiety was a tight knot in my chest. I just wanted to get there, slip into the house, hide in the nursery with the twins, and be invisible. That was the goal. Survival. The road I was on, Old Mill Creek, was narrow. It twisted through the woods with tall pines lining both sides, their branches heavy with snow. There were no street lights out here. It was just my headlights cutting through the swirling white darkness. Then, up ahead, I saw a flash of orange. Hazard lights. I slowed down instinctively. As I got closer, the shape of a car emerged from the gloom. It wasn't just any car. Even covered in a dusting of snow, I could tell it was expensive. It was a long, silver sedan, low to the ground, a Jaguar or maybe a Mercedes. The kind of car that costs more than my entire house. It was pulled over onto the narrow shoulder, half in the ditch, looking completely out of place against the rough tree line. But it wasn't the car that made me catch my breath. It was the figure standing next to it. A woman was standing by the front fender. She was facing the road, waving her arms frantically as my headlights swept over her. My foot hovered over the brake. She was dressed for a ballroom, not a blizzard. She was wearing a long, shimmering gown that looked like liquid silver, and a fur stole wrapped around her shoulders that looked entirely too thin for this weather. The wind was whipping her hair around her face, and even from 20 feet away, I could see she was shaking. I slowed to a crawl. I looked at her. She looked right at me, her eyes wide and desperate. Then I looked at the clock. 6:42 p.m. If I stopped, I was done. I wouldn't just be 5 minutes late. I would be 20, maybe 30 minutes late. I would walk into that gala, soaking wet, freezing cold, and tardy. Mrs. Vance would be standing at the door like a sentry. The humiliation would be absolute. The snide comments would last for years. I could practically hear Pearlie sighing. I told you we should have hired a professional nanny instead of asking your mother. Panic seized me. Pure, selfish panic. I took my foot off the brake and pressed the gas. I drove past her. I actually drove past her. The guilt hit me instantly, harder than the cold air outside. I watched her in my rearview mirror for a split second before the darkness swallowed her up. She had stopped waving. She had just slumped her shoulders, watching her last hope disappear around the bend. I drove for another 100 yards, my heart hammering against my ribs. Someone else will stop, I told myself. She probably has a cell phone. Rich people always have help on the way. She has AAA. She has a driver coming. I can't stop. I have to be at the estate. I promised Melvin. But the logic tasted like ash in my mouth. It was 10 degrees outside. We were in a dead zone for cell service. I knew because my Spotify had cut out 3 miles back. There were no other cars on the road. It was Christmas Eve. Everyone was already where they were supposed to be. That woman wasn't just inconvenienced. She was in danger. I thought about her face. She looked about my age. She had lines of worry etched around her eyes. She wasn't some young kid who ran out of gas. She was an older woman, alone in the dark in a snowstorm. Then a thought struck me so hard it almost made me sick. What if that was my mother? My mom passed away 10 years ago, but I could still see her. I imagined my sweet, fragile mother standing on the side of a mountain road, freezing to death while people drove by in their warm cars, worried about being late to a party. What if that was me? If I broke down, would I want the world to drive by because I wasn't important enough to stop for? No, I said out loud. The word filled the empty car. No, Dana, you are not that person. Mrs. Vance might make me feel small. She might make me feel poor, but she would never make me cruel. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly, the anti-lock pulsing against my foot, before coming to a halt in the middle of the empty road. I took a deep breath, looked at the clock one last time, 6:44 p.m., and made my peace with it. I was going to be late. I was going to be ridiculed. I was going to walk into that mansion looking like a drowned rat, and Mrs. Vance was going to tear me apart with her eyes. Let her, I muttered, shifting the car into reverse. Let her judge me. I backed up carefully, watching the red glow of my taillights illuminate the snow behind me. I backed up until I saw the orange hazard lights blinking in the distance again. As I pulled up behind the luxury sedan, I saw the woman turn around. She looked shocked that I had come back. She had her arms wrapped tight around herself, her teeth chattering so hard I could almost hear it through the glass. I put the car in park and killed the engine. I didn't grab my purse. I didn't grab my lipstick. I grabbed the heavy wool blanket I keep in the back seat for emergencies and my heavy flashlight. I opened the door, and the biting wind hit me like a physical blow. It stole the breath right out of my lungs. The snow stung my cheeks. Hang on! I yelled over the wind, trudging through the slush toward her. I'm coming. I was throwing away my dignity for the evening. I was throwing away my chance to show the Vances I could be reliable and proper. But as I looked at that shivering woman, I knew I was doing the only thing that actually mattered. I was being human. I just hoped that when I faced Mrs. Vance later, my conscience would be enough to keep me warm, because I had a feeling the reception at the mansion was going to be colder than this storm. I reached the woman just as a gust of wind nearly knocked us both over. Up close, The situation was even worse than it had looked from the road. She wasn't just cold, she was freezing. Her lips were a pale shade of blue, and her teeth were chattering so violently she couldn't form words. The expensive silver dress she was wearing was soaked through at the hem, and her heels were sinking into the slush. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, like a deer caught in headlights. She didn't look like a rich woman in that moment. She just looked like a frightened human being who knew she was in trouble. "Help!" she managed to gasp out, the word barely a whisper against the howling wind. "I've got you," I shouted over the gale. I didn't think twice. I stripped off my heavy wool coat, the one I had bought on sale at Macy's 5 years ago, the one that was supposed to keep me warm and presentable for the party, and I wrapped it around her shoulders. The cold hit me instantly. It felt like 1,000 needles pricking my skin through my thin dress. But seeing her pull that coat tight around herself, burying her face in the collar, made it worth it. I unwound my scarf, my favorite knitted one, and wrapped it around her head and neck, covering her ears. "Get in my car," I told her, pointing to my sedan idling a few feet away with the heater running. "Go sit. I'm going to look at your engine." She shook her head, grabbing my arm with a surprisingly strong grip. You'll freeze." "I'm tougher than I look." I lied. "Go. Warm up." She hesitated for a second, then nodded and stumbled toward my car. I watched her get in and shut the door before I turned my attention to her luxury beast of a vehicle. I'm no mechanic, but I was married to Frank Farrington for 40 years. Frank didn't believe in calling a tow truck unless the car was on fire or in a ravine. He taught me that engines need 3 things: air, fuel, and spark. And on a cold night like this, it was usually the spark that gave up the ghost. I popped the hood of her car. It was heavy, solid steel. I grabbed the flashlight from my pocket and shone it into the engine bay. It was clean, cleaner than my kitchen table. But even fancy cars have the same basic parts. "Come on," I muttered, my fingers numb as I prodded the battery. "Show me the problem." I saw it almost immediately. The negative terminal clamp was sitting slightly askew. It must have rattled loose over the mountain roads. When the cold hit, the connection failed. It was such a small thing, a simple mechanical failure, but out here in the dark, it was enough to leave someone stranded. I didn't have a wrench, but I had grit. I grabbed the terminal and twisted it. It moved. I used the heel of my hand to hammer it down, forcing it to bite into the metal post. It wasn't a professional fix, but it was a get-you-home fix. Then, just to be safe, I jogged back to my car, popped my trunk, and grabbed my jumper cables. I hooked my little sedan up to her luxury car. I let my engine rev, sending power flowing from my humble battery into hers. I got back into the driver's seat of my car to get out of the wind while we waited for the charge to build. The woman was sitting in the passenger seat, still shivering, clutching my coat like a lifeline. The heat was blasting, and the car smelled like wet wool and my dusty rose lipstick. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steadying now, though still raspy. "You stopped. No one else stopped." I rubbed my hands together, trying to get the feeling back in my fingers. People get scared in storms. They get tunnel vision. I thought I was going to die out there, she admitted, looking out the window at the swirling snow. It sounds dramatic, but I really thought that was it. Frozen in a dress that cost more than my first car. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "It's a beautiful dress," I said gently. "It's a costume," she replied, turning to look at me. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a weariness I recognized. "I'm wearing it for a party I don't want to attend, to impress people I don't like, so they can ask me for money I don't want to give them." I smiled. I couldn't help it. "Sounds like a fun night." She rolled her eyes, and suddenly she didn't look like a stranger anymore. She looked like a friend. Vultures, she said. That's what they are. I'm the guest of honor, apparently. But really, I'm just the main course. They want to pick my bones clean. If it makes you feel any better, I said, checking the time. 6:55 p.m. I was officially late. I'm heading to a party where I'm the opposite of the guest of honor. I'm the help. She looked at me, taking in my face. You don't look like help. You look like a savior. Tell that to my daughter-in-law. I chuckled. I'm going to a big fancy house in the Golden Horseshoe. I'm supposed to sit in the nursery and keep the grandkids quiet so the important people can talk business. If I'm lucky, I might get a plate of leftovers in the kitchen. The woman fell silent. She looked at me with a profound sadness. Why do you go? Because I love my son, I said simply. And because if I don't go, they make his life miserable. I take the hit, so he doesn't have to. She nodded slowly, as if I had just spoken a secret language she understood perfectly. Family, she whispered. We do stupid, painful things for family, don't we? I'm going to this gala to secure a future for my companies, for my granddaughter. But sometimes I wonder if the sacrifice is noticed. It is, I said, even if they don't say it. God sees it, and you know it in your heart. We sat there for a moment, just two grandmothers in a beat-up car on the side of a mountain, hiding from the storm. The difference in our bank accounts didn't matter. The difference in our clothes didn't matter. We were both just tired women trying to do right by the people we loved, even when those people didn't appreciate it. I think you're ready, I said, pointing to her car. Let's try the engine. We got out. The wind seemed a little less biting now, or maybe I was just warmer on the inside. She got into her driver's seat and pushed the button. The engine roared to life immediately, purring like a giant cat. I unhooked the cables and tossed them into my trunk. She climbed out of the car one last time to hand me back my coat and scarf. Keep the scarf, I said. You're still shivering. No, she said firmly, draping the coat over my shoulders and pressing the scarf into my hands. Her hands were warm now. You have done enough. You have a party to get to. Don't let them treat you badly. You hear me? You are worth 10 of them. And you watch out for those vultures. I told her. Don't let them pick you clean. She smiled, a genuine, crinkly-eyed smile that transformed her face. I won't. Not tonight. You reminded me that there are still decent people in the world. That gives me strength. She reached out and squeezed my hand. We didn't exchange names. It felt unnecessary. It was a roadside truce, a moment of connection that didn't need formalities. Go, she said. Drive safe. I watched her get back into her silver car. She pulled away carefully, merging onto the road. I waited until her taillights disappeared around the bend before I got back into my own car. I turned on the interior light and flipped down the mirror. I gasped. I was a disaster. My dusty rose lipstick was smudged. My hair, which I had sprayed into place so carefully, was plastered to my forehead, wet from the snow. My mascara had run a little under one eye, and when I looked down at my dress, my heart sank. There was a smear of black grease right across the front, where I had leaned over her engine. My shoes were soaked through with mud and slush. I looked like I had been in a wrestling match. I checked the clock. 7:10 p.m. I was late. I was dirty. I looked like a homeless person. Well, Dana, I said to my reflection, wiping the smudge of grease with a tissue, which only made it worse. You wanted to be invisible. Good luck with that now. I put the car in drive. The dread came back, heavier than before. I knew exactly what was waiting for me at the Vance estate. I knew the look Mrs. Vance would give me. I knew the silence that would fall over the room when I walked in. But as I pulled back onto the road, following the tire tracks of the woman I had just saved, I felt something else underneath the fear. I felt a strange little spark of pride. I had done the right thing. Now, I just had to survive the punishment for it. The Golden Horseshoe isn't just a neighborhood. It's a fortress. By the time I pulled up to the main gate, the snow had turned into a full-blown blizzard, swirling around the stone pillars like white smoke. The security guard looked at my driver's license, then looked at my 2014 sedan with the dented bumper, and then back at me. He didn't say a word, just pressed a button to open the iron gates, his expression making it clear that I was the most underwhelming thing he'd seen all night. I drove up the winding driveway, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The Vance estate loomed ahead, lit up like a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean. Every window was glowing with golden light. I could see the massive Christmas tree in the foyer through the double doors, decked out in crystals and white ribbons, cold, expensive, and perfect. The driveway was already packed. It looked like a luxury car dealership. There were sleek black Bentleys, massive Range Rovers, and low-slung Porsches parked in neat rows. The valets were running back and forth in their red jackets, parking cars that cost more than my entire retirement fund. I didn't wait for a valet. I couldn't. The thought of a young man in a uniform opening my car door and seeing the fast food wrappers in the back seat or the worn-out upholstery was too much. Instead, I pulled around the side of the house near the garages and parked behind a large hedge. I jammed my car in next to a catering van. It seemed fitting. I wasn't a guest. I was just the help. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment in the silence. The heat died instantly, and the cold crept back in. I looked down at myself. It was worse than I thought. The grease stain on my navy dress was dark and shiny, smeared right across my stomach. My hem was soaked and heavy with dirty slush. My shoes, my good, sensible heels, were caked in mud. And my hair, well, the wind had taken care of that. I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like the mother of the groom. I looked like I had been dragged backwards through a hedge. Just get inside, I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. Get to the nursery. Clean up in the bathroom. No one has to see you. I grabbed the 2 gift bags from the passenger seat. They weren't much, just some coloring books and new pajamas for the twins, but I had wrapped them carefully with red paper and gold bows. Holding them made me feel a little more like a grandmother and a little less like a disaster. I stepped out of the car and trudged through the snow toward the front door. I should have gone to the back door, through the kitchen. I know that now, but in my head, I was still family. I was still Melvin's mother. I thought I deserved to walk through the front door. I reached the massive oak double doors and pressed the doorbell. I heard a chime inside, a deep, resonant bong bong bong. I waited, stomping my feet to knock the snow off my shoes. I prayed Melvin would answer. If it was Melvin, he would hug me. He would say, "Mom, you're freezing," and he would rush me to a fireplace. He would make it okay. The lock clicked. The heavy door swung open. It wasn't Melvin. Mrs. Vance stood there. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a floor-length gown in a deep emerald green velvet that made her look like royalty. Her silver hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection, not a strand out of place. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, catching the light from the chandelier behind her. She was holding a glass of champagne, smiling as the door opened, expecting another wealthy couple or perhaps the VIP investor. But when she saw me, the smile didn't just fade. It shattered. She froze. Her eyes widened, taking in the wet hair, the mud on the porch, and finally, the grease stain on my dress. She actually took a step back, pulling her velvet skirt away as if I were contagious. "Dana," she said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. "Hello, Mrs. Vance," I said, trying to sound cheerful. though my teeth were ready to chatter. I'm so sorry I'm late. The roads are terrible and— Stop, she hissed, cutting me off. She looked over my shoulder quickly, checking to see if anyone else was behind me, terrified that one of her important guests might see us together. My God, look at you, she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. What happened to you? You look like a beggar. The word hung in the cold air between us. Beggar. I had some car trouble. I tried to explain, clutching the gift bags tighter. I stopped to help someone, and— I don't care, she snapped. We have the most important investor in the city arriving any minute. The VIP guest is due to walk through this door, and I have this standing on my porch. She waved her hand at me like I was a pile of trash that had been left out on the curb. We can't have you looking like a beggar in the living room, Dana. The smell of wet wool alone is enough to ruin the atmosphere. I felt the blood rush to my face, hot and stinging. I can go upstairs, I stammered. I'll go straight to the nursery. I have a change of clothes in the car. Maybe I can— No, she said, blocking the doorway with her body. She stood there like a stone wall, guarding her precious party from the stain of my presence. You aren't walking through my foyer tracking mud on the marble. Absolutely not. She looked at me with cold calculation. For a second, I thought she was going to tell me to go around to the servants' entrance. That would have been humiliating enough. But she didn't. She looked at the grease stain again and wrinkled her nose. Maybe it's best you just go home, Dana, she said. Her tone was dismissive, final. You don't fit in here. Not tonight. We need perfection tonight. And you are— well, look at yourself. You're a mess. My heart broke. It actually cracked. I had driven through a blizzard. I had saved a stranger. I had come all this way just to see my son and my grandchildren. And she was turning me away at the door, like a solicitor. But the boys— I whispered, my voice thick with tears I refused to shed. I brought their Christmas pajamas. We'll give them to them, she said, reaching out to take the bags from me. She didn't touch my hand. She grabbed the handles of the gift bags and pulled them away, leaving my hands empty and cold. Go home, Dana, before you embarrass Melvin. Melvin, Mom. I looked past Mrs. Vance's shoulder. Melvin was standing in the hallway. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but he looked tired. He was holding a tray of empty glasses, helping the catering staff. Melvin, I said, relief flooding through me. Melvin, tell her, I just had a little trouble on the road. I just want to see the kids. Melvin looked at me. He saw the grease. He saw the mud. Then he looked at Mrs. Vance. I saw the fear in his eyes. He was terrified of her. He lived in her house, worked in her husband's company, and lived by her rules. He was trapped. Mrs. Vance turned her head slightly, her eyes boring into him. Melvin, your mother is leaving. She's not feeling well. And frankly, she's not dressed for the occasion. Say good night. My son looked at me. I begged him with my eyes to be a man, to say, let her in. She's my mother. But he didn't. He looked down at his shiny black shoes. I'm sorry, Mom, he mumbled, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the wind. Maybe it's better. It's really crazy in here tonight. The investor is coming and everyone is on edge. Melvin, I whispered. The betrayal hit harder than the cold. Good night, Dana, Mrs. Vance said brightly, now that she had won. Drive safe. The roads are treacherous. And then she closed the door. She didn't slam it. She just closed it firmly, shutting out the cold, the snow. And me. I stood there on the porch, staring at the heavy wood. I could hear the muffled sound of laughter and music starting up inside. I could smell the faint aroma of roasted turkey and pine needles seeping through the cracks. I was alone. I looked down at my empty hands. My knuckles were red and raw. The grease stain on my dress felt like a brand of shame. I had never felt so small in my entire life. I wasn't a mother or a grandmother in that moment. I was just a nuisance, a dirty, embarrassing spot on their perfect evening. Tears finally spilled over, hot tracks running down my freezing cheeks. I turned around to walk back to my car. My head hung low. I had to get out of there. I had to go home and forget this night ever happened. I trudged back toward the side of the house where my car was hidden. I wiped my eyes, trying to see where I was going. But just as I reached the corner of the garage, a pair of headlights swept across the driveway. A long, silver car was pulling up to the front entrance. It was the VIP. I stopped in the shadows, hidden by the catering van. I couldn't help myself. I wanted to see who was so important that I had to be thrown out into the snow like garbage. I wanted to see the person who mattered more than family. The silver car stopped. The valet rushed to open the door. And then I stopped breathing because I knew that car. I had jump-started that car 20 minutes ago. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She wasn't shivering anymore. She had fixed her makeup. She looked regal, powerful, and terrifyingly elegant. It was Clara. I stood frozen in the dark, my hand covering my mouth. The woman I had saved on the side of the road, the woman I had shared my scarf with, was the billionaire investor they were all desperate to impress. And she was walking up the steps to the very door that had just been slammed in my face. I was trapped. There is no other way to describe it. I was standing on the edge of the porch, clutching my empty hands, trying to make my legs move toward the darkness of the driveway where my car was hidden. But my legs felt like lead. The humiliation weighed me down so heavily I could barely breathe. Before I could take a single step into the shadows, the massive oak doors behind me flew open again. Light flooded out onto the snowy porch, illuminating me like a criminal caught in a spotlight. I froze. I turned around, squinting against the glare. Mrs. Vance was back. She had realized the VIP's car was right there at the curb, and she had rushed out to perform her duties as the perfect hostess. She was flanked by Pearlie and Melvin, all of them arranging themselves like statues in a museum. Mrs. Vance almost tripped over her own velvet gown when she saw me still standing there. For a split second, her hostess mask slipped. Her eyes bulged, and her lip curled in pure fury. She leaned toward me, her voice a low, dangerous hiss that the approaching guest couldn't hear. "I told you to leave." She spat, the venom spraying from her lips. "Get out of sight. Now, hide behind the pillar if you have to, but do not let her see you." I scrambled back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to move toward the large stone column that held up the portico, trying to make myself as small as possible. I felt ridiculous. I was a 60-year-old woman, a mother, a grandmother, and I was being told to hide in the bushes like a stray dog. But it was too late to run. The driver of the silver sedan had already opened the rear door. A valet was holding an umbrella, and the woman, Clara, stepped out onto the red brick of the driveway. The transformation in Mrs. Vance was instant and terrifying. She spun away from me, and the snarl on her face vanished. In its place was a smile so wide and sugary it looked painful. She clasped her hands together, radiating warmth and charm. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Mrs. Wells," Mrs. Vance cried out, her voice pitching up an octave. "Oh, thank goodness you made it. We were so worried about the roads. Welcome, welcome to our home." Pearlie rushed forward, smoothing her dress. "We are so honored you could join us, Mrs. Wells. Truly honored." Even Melvin straightened his tie, putting on his business face, trying to look like the successful son-in-law he was desperate to be. I pressed my back against the cold stone of the pillar, holding my breath. I just wanted to disappear. I prayed the shadows were deep enough to hide my grease-stained dress and my shame. Clara walked up the steps. She moved differently than she had on the side of the road. Out there in the snow, she had been vulnerable. Here, she was a queen. She walked with a straight spine, her head held high, looking at the house and the people with a cool, detached assessment. She was wearing the fur stole I had seen earlier, but now she looked impeccable. Mrs. Vance was practically bowing. "Please come in out of the cold. We have champagne waiting, and hors d'oeuvres. We've been dying to introduce you to the board members." She gestured grandly toward the open door, trying to shepherd Clara inside, effectively blocking me from view with her own body. Clara reached the top step. She stopped. She didn't look at Mrs. Vance. She didn't look at Pearlie. She didn't look at the open door or the warm, golden light of the foyer. She stopped dead in her tracks, causing Mrs. Vance to almost bump into her. "Mrs. Wells," Mrs. Vance asked, her smile faltering just a tiny bit. "Is everything all right? The coat check is just inside." Clara wasn't listening. She was looking past Mrs. Vance's velvet shoulder. She was looking into the shadows. She was looking at me. My heart stopped. I wanted to sink through the concrete. I looked down at my muddy shoes, waiting for the judgment. I expected her to look at me with recognition, but stay silent. I expected her to give me a polite nod and walk inside to mingle with the people who had money. That's what people usually do. They stick to their own kind. But Clara didn't move toward the door. She turned her back on Mrs. Vance. She turned her back on the warmth and the champagne. She walked straight toward me. The silence on the porch was deafening. You could hear the snow falling. Mrs. Vance turned around, confused, her mouth slightly open. She looked from Clara to me, trying to understand what was happening. I could see the wheels turning in her head. Why is the billionaire walking toward the help? Is she going to ask her to move her car? Clara stopped 2 feet in front of me. I looked up at her, trembling. I must have looked like a wreck. My hair was flat, my nose was probably red, and I was clutching the front of my dress to hide the stain. Clara didn't see the mess. Her face softened. The icy businesswoman look melted away, and the warmth I had seen in the car returned. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. "Dana," she said softly. I swallowed hard. "Hello, Mrs. Wells." Mrs. Vance let out a strange, high-pitched laugh, sounding nervous. "Oh, do you know do you know Melvin's mother?" She said Melvin's mother, like it was the name of a disease. "I'm so sorry if she's bothering you, Mrs. Wells. She was just leaving. She had a bit of an accident and isn't dressed for." Clara spun around. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her voice. She just held up one hand, palm out, and silenced Mrs. Vance instantly. The authority in that one gesture was absolute. Mrs. Vance's mouth clicked shut. Clara turned back to me. She looked at my hands. They were still red from the cold and stained with engine grease. And then she did the unthinkable. She reached out with her manicured, diamond-ringed hands and took my dirty ones in hers. She didn't care about the grease. She didn't care about the mud. She held my hands tight, squeezing them just like a sister would. "My dear friend," Clara said, her voice ringing out clear and strong in the night air. "I was hoping you made it safely. I've been worrying about you for the last 20 minutes. I stood there, stunned. I made it. Just barely. You and me both," she said with a laugh. Mrs. Vance looked like she had been hit with a frying pan. Her eyes were darting back and forth between us. "Friend," she squeaked. You were friends?" Clara finally looked at Mrs. Vance, but there was no warmth in her eyes now. It was the look of a hawk staring at a mouse. Friends. Clara repeated the word, tasting it. No, we are more than that. This woman saved my life tonight. The color drained out of Mrs. Vance's face. It went from pale to chalk white. Pearlie put a hand over her mouth. Melvin just stared, his jaw hanging loose. I was stranded on Old Mill Creek Road. Clara continued, her voice steady but sharp. My car died in the blizzard. Dozens of people drove past me. People in warm cars. People who probably consider themselves good citizens. They left me there to freeze. She paused, letting the words sink in. But not her, Clara said, lifting my dirty hand up a little like she was presenting a trophy. She stopped. She gave me the coat off her back. She fixed my engine with her bare hands in a snowstorm. She sacrificed her own comfort, her own warmth, and her own time to help a stranger. Clara looked at me again, and her eyes were shining. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this wonderful woman. I would still be on the side of that mountain. Mrs. Vance made a choking sound. She tried to recover. She tried to pivot. That's what social climbers do. They pivot. Oh, well. Mrs. Vance stammered, putting that fake smile back on, though it looked brittle now. That is just so like Dana. She's very handy. How wonderful that it worked out. Well, come in. Let's get you both inside. Dana, why don't you go around to the kitchen? And Clara didn't move. She didn't let go of my hand. The kitchen? Clara asked. Her tone was light, but underneath it was steel. Why would she go to the kitchen? Is she not a guest? Mrs. Vance froze. Well, look at her dress, Mrs. Wells. She's not really prepared for a formal evening. We have standards for the gala. Clara looked at my dress. Then she looked at Mrs. Vance's velvet gown. Standards, Clara said. Interesting word. She stepped closer to me, aligning herself with me, creating a united front against the Vances. You know, Clara said conversationally, addressing the group but keeping her eyes on Mrs. Vance. I have a rule in business. I don't look at a person's clothes to judge their worth. I look at their hands, and I look at their heart. She looked at Melvin. My son flinched under her gaze. You must be the son, Clara said. Melvin, isn't it? Yes, ma'am, Melvin whispered. Your mother is a hero, Melvin, Clara said. She told me she was terrified of being late tonight because she didn't want to disappoint you. She told me she stopped to help me even though she knew she would face consequences for being tardy. She loves you very much. Melvin looked at me. His eyes were watering. He looked ashamed. Now, Clara said, turning back to Mrs. Vance, I believe I was promised champagne, but I don't like to drink alone. And I certainly don't like to drink with people who would leave my savior standing on a porch in the cold. She hooked her arm through mine. Her expensive fur pressed against my cheap, grease-stained polyester dress. Dana is coming in with me, Clara announced. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And she is going to sit next to me. If that is a problem for your standards, Mrs. Vance, then my driver can take me back home right now, and we can forget about this investment entirely. The silence that followed lasted for 3 heartbeats. Mrs. Vance looked at the driveway, where the car was waiting. She looked at the house, which needed the money. She looked at me, the woman she despised. She swallowed her pride. It must have tasted bitter. No problem at all, Mrs. Vance choked out. Please, come in, both of you. Clara squeezed my arm. Shall we? She whispered to me. I looked at her. I looked at the grease on my dress. I looked at the mud on my shoes. And then I looked at Mrs. Vance's defeated face. I stood up straighter. I lifted my chin. Yes, I said, we shall. And together, the billionaire and the babysitter walked through the front door, leaving the snobs scrambling to catch up. Walking into that living room felt like walking onto a stage where everyone had forgotten their lines. The room was magnificent. I'll give Mrs. Vance that. There was a 12-foot Christmas tree in the corner, dripping with crystal ornaments. A string quartet was playing softly near the fireplace. Waiters in white gloves were circling with silver trays of champagne and caviar. The guests were the who's who of Asheville, bankers, politicians, old money families who had run this town for generations. And then there was us, Clara Wells, the billionaire investor, looking like a silver queen, and me, Dana Farrington, looking like I had just crawled out from under a truck. As we stepped onto the Persian rug, the chatter died instantly. It started near the door and spread like a wave across the room until the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the squeak of my muddy shoes on the hardwood floor. Every head turned, every eye fixed on us. I saw people whispering behind their hands. I saw eyebrows raise. I saw a woman in a red sequined dress actually put her monocle up to her eye to get a better look at the grease stain on my stomach. Usually, this would have been my nightmare. I would have wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. But this time, it was different. Clara's arm was linked through mine, tight and secure. She wasn't dragging me along. She was parading me. She held her head high, daring anyone to say a word. Mrs. Vance was fluttering around us like a nervous moth. "Right this way, Mrs. Wells," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We have a private seating area set up near the fireplace. It's much warmer. And, oh, Dana, maybe you could—" She gestured vaguely toward the corner of the room, away from the VIP seating. She was still trying to separate us. She was still trying to hide the stain. Clara stopped in the center of the room. She didn't move toward the private seating. She turned to face Mrs. Vance, and because we were linked, I turned too. We stood there, united front in the middle of the party. "Mrs. Vance," Clara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It had that special quality that powerful people have. When they speak, everyone else shuts up. "Before we sit, before we drink, I think there is something everyone here needs to know." Mrs. Vance froze. A hopeful look crossed her face. I think she thought Clara was about to announce the investment right then and there. "Oh, yes, of course. Please, the floor is yours." Clara looked around the room, making eye contact with the wealthy guests. "I know you are all wondering why I walked in here arm in arm with this woman," Clara said, gesturing to me. "I know you are looking at her dress. I know you are looking at her shoes." The room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. "You see a mess," Clara continued, "but I see a miracle." She took a deep breath. 40 minutes ago, I was stranded on Old Mill Creek Road. My car died in the middle of the blizzard. It was freezing. I was alone. I waved at 5 different cars. 5. Some of them were luxury cars, just like the ones parked in your driveway tonight. And do you know what they did? They drove right past me. A murmur went through the crowd. People looked uncomfortable. They shifted in their expensive suits. "I was losing hope," Clara said, her voice dropping lower, making everyone lean in. "I was freezing to death. And then this woman stopped. She squeezed my hand. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know I had money. She didn't know I could offer her anything in return. She stopped because she is a decent human being. She gave me the coat off her back. She fixed my engine with her bare hands while the snow soaked her to the bone. That is why she looks like this. She bears these stains because she saved my life." Clara turned her gaze back to Mrs. Vance. Mrs. Vance looked sick. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "In my world," Clara said, "we talk a lot about net worth. We talk about assets and liabilities. But tonight, I was reminded that the only value that matters is character. And this woman, Dana, has more character in her little finger than most people have in their entire bank accounts." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away. No one had ever spoken about me like that. Certainly not in this house. Mrs. Vance let out a nervous, high-pitched chuckle. She was desperate to take back control of the narrative. She stepped forward, wringing her hands. Well, yes, that is quite a story. Mrs. Vance stammered, and we are so grateful that Dana was available to assist. She's always been very practical. Mrs. Vance looked at me with cold eyes, silently warning me to play along. Then she turned her attention back to Clara, her eyes gleaming with greed. But all's well that ends well. Mrs. Vance beamed. You're safe, you're here, and we have so much to discuss. The board is eager to hear your thoughts on the proposal. Shall we move to the study? We have the contract ready for your review. There it was. The pivot. She stepped right over the humanity to get to the money. She didn't care that I had saved a life. She only cared that the checkbook had arrived safely. Clara didn't move. She didn't smile. The contract, Clara repeated flatly. Yes, Mrs. Vance said, motioning for a waiter to bring a fresh glass of champagne. It's a wonderful opportunity, a partnership that will benefit both our families. Clara looked at the champagne glass the waiter was holding out to her. She didn't take it. She looked at Mrs. Vance. I'm afraid not, Clara said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Vance blinked. I beg your pardon. I said no, Clara said calmly. I won't be looking at the contract. In fact, I won't be investing in your company at all. The color drained from Mrs. Vance's face so fast she looked like a ghost. Pearlie gasped audibly. Even the string quartet stopped playing. But Mrs. Vance sputtered. But we've been talking for months. The projections, the synergy, it has nothing to do with the numbers, Clara said. Her voice was ice cold now. It has to do with you. Clara took a step closer to Mrs. Vance. I saw how you treated Dana when I walked up the driveway. Clara said, I saw you trying to hide her. I heard you tell her she looked like a beggar. I heard you tell her to leave. Mrs. Vance opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. You were ashamed of her, Clara said. You were ashamed of the woman who saved my life. And do you know what that tells me? It tells me that you value appearances over people. It tells me that you judge a book by its cover. And most importantly, it tells me that you lack integrity. Clara looked around the room, addressing everyone now. I have a strict rule, she announced. I don't do business with people who treat others like garbage. If you can't treat your own family with respect, especially a woman as noble as this one, then how can I trust you with my money? How can I trust you with my employees? Mrs. Vance looked like she was going to faint. She grabbed Pearlie's arm to steady herself. Mrs. Wells, please, it was a misunderstanding. Dana is, well, you know how family can be. Yes, Clara cut her off. I do know, and I know that if I were in Dana's shoes, poor, messy, and tired, you would have treated me the exact same way. You only like me because I'm wearing diamonds, but underneath this fur, I'm just a woman, same as her. Clara tightened her grip on my arm. So, the answer is no, Clara said firmly. The deal is off. Permanently. The fallout was instant. I could see the realization hitting Mrs. Vance like a physical blow. The millions of dollars she had been counting on, gone. The prestige, gone. The social ladder she had been climbing so desperately had just been kicked out from under her feet. And the worst part for her, it was all because of me. The beggar she tried to kick out had just cost her a fortune. Clara turned to me, her face softening instantly. Dana, I don't know about you, but I find the air in here very stuffy. Would you like to leave? I'd love to buy you a warm dinner, somewhere where we can sit in a booth and relax. I looked at Mrs. Vance. She was trembling, tears of rage and humiliation welling in her eyes. I looked at Pearlie, who was staring at the floor. And then I looked at Melvin. He was standing off to the side. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking at me. And for the first time in years, he wasn't looking at me with pity or embarrassment. He was looking at me with awe. I squeezed Clara's arm back. I would love that, Clara, I said. I know a great diner. They have the best pie in Asheville. Pie sounds perfect, Clara said. She turned us around. We walked back toward the door, past the shocked guests, past the silent musicians, and past the woman who had tried to make me feel small. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. The silence in that room was the loudest apology I would never get. And honestly, it was better than money. We walked out of the front door, and the cold air hit my face, but for the first time all night, it didn't feel biting. It felt fresh. It felt like freedom. The snow was still falling softly, covering the muddy tracks we had made earlier, turning the world clean and white again. Clara held onto my arm until we reached the bottom of the steps. She took a deep breath, watching her breath mist in the air. You know, she said, looking back at the massive, glowing mansion, houses like that always give me a headache. Too much marble, not enough warmth. I chuckled, a sound that felt rusty in my throat. It's certainly impressive. It's a mausoleum, Clara corrected, full of dead souls trying to look alive. My car was still parked around the side, hidden behind the hedge where I had shamefully stashed it. Clara's driver was waiting right at the curb with the engine running. Follow me, Clara said. I'm serious about that pie. I haven't eaten since lunch, and I refuse to eat a canopy passed around by people who hate me. I was just about to nod, to tell her I would meet her there, when the front door banged open behind us. Mom, wait. I froze. My hand was on my car keys in my pocket. I turned around slowly. It was Melvin. He had run out without his coat. He was standing on the porch, in his tuxedo, shivering, looking frantic. Behind him, standing in the open doorway, was Pearlie. She looked furious, her arms crossed over her chest. Melvin! Pearlie shouted, her voice shrill and cutting through the quiet night. Get back inside. Mother is having a crisis. We need to manage the damage. Melvin looked at his wife. Then he looked at me. For years, I had watched my son look at his wife with fear. He was always trying to please her, trying to keep the peace, trying to be the man she wanted him to be. He had shrunk himself down, so small just to fit into her world. But tonight, standing in the snow, something snapped. No, Melvin said. It wasn't a shout. It was just a word. But it was the heaviest word I had ever heard him speak. What did you say to me? Pearlie gasped. Melvin turned his back on her. He walked down the steps, his dress shoes crunching on the ice. He walked right past Clara's fancy car and came straight to me. He looked at the grease stain on my dress. He looked at my tired eyes. And then he pulled me into a hug that knocked the wind out of me. He held me tight, shaking, burying his face in my shoulder like he used to when he was a little boy, and had a bad dream. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have opened the door. I should have told her to go to hell. I let her treat you like dirt. I patted his back, tears welling up in my eyes again. It's okay, honey. It's okay. It's not okay, he said, pulling back to look at me. It's not. I've been a coward. I watched them treat you like the help for years because I was afraid of losing this. He waved his hand at the mansion, the cars, the money. But tonight, watching Mrs. Wells honor you, it woke me up. If a stranger can see your worth, why can't I? He took a deep breath and looked back at the house. Pearlie was still standing there, stunned. I'm going with Mom. Melvin yelled up to her. If you leave, Pearlie threatened, her voice trembling, Don't bother coming back tonight. Mother is furious. Tell your mother, Melvin said, his voice steady and loud, that my mother is worth 10 of her, and I'd rather eat at a diner with a woman of character than drink champagne with a bully. He turned to me. Can I catch a ride with you, Mom? I don't think I want to be in that house right now. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. Get in the car, Melvin. The heater takes a minute, but it works. We drove in a caravan away from the Golden Horseshoe. I led the way in my dented sedan with my son in the passenger seat, and the billionaire followed us in her silver luxury car. We left the gates, the guards, and the judgment behind us. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a booth at the Red Booth Diner on the edge of town. It was the kind of place that smelled like frying bacon and strong coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed, and the waitress, a woman named Brenda who I'd known for years, didn't care about grease stains or tuxedos. We ordered 3 slices of cherry pie and 3 coffees. The atmosphere was completely different from the party. We were laughing. Melvin was loosening his tie, telling Clara about the time I tried to bake a turkey and forgot to take the plastic bag of giblets out. Clara was telling us about her first car, a rust bucket that broke down every other Tuesday. It felt normal. It felt human. As we finished our pie, Clara wiped her mouth with a paper napkin and leaned forward. The playful look in her eyes faded into something more serious. Dana, she said, I wasn't just making a scene back there at the party. I meant every word I said. I put my fork down. I know you did, Clara, and I appreciate it. You saved my dignity. You saved my life, she countered. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about your future. She reached into her purse and pulled out a simple leather notebook. She opened it and clicked a pen. I run a charitable foundation. Clara said, we do a lot of work in the city, scholarships, housing assistance, emergency relief. But I have a problem. What kind of problem? Melvin asked, leaning in protectively. My problem is that I have too many people with MBAs and not enough people with hearts. Clara said, looking directly at me. I have a board full of people who know how to manage a spreadsheet, but they wouldn't know how to talk to a struggling mother if their lives depended on it. They don't know how to stop the car in a snowstorm. She wrote something down on the paper and tore the sheet out. I need a community liaison. Clara said, I need someone who can be the face of the foundation for the people we actually help, someone who can listen to them, understand what they really need, and report back to me with the truth, not just what I want to hear. I need someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. She slid the paper across the Formica table to me. It was a job offer. There was a salary written on it. I stared at the number. It was more than I had made in 3 years at the library. Clara, I whispered, I don't have a degree in social work. I'm just a retired librarian. I'm not qualified for this. You are the most qualified person I've met in 10 years, Clara said firmly. You have empathy, Dana. You have grit. And you have integrity. I can teach you the paperwork. I can't teach someone how to care. That you either have or you don't. She tapped the paper. This is a paid position. Full benefits. And you'll answer directly to me. No middle management. No Mrs. Van Cess looking down their nose at you. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Melvin. He was grinning from ear to ear. Take it, Mom, he said. You'd be amazing at it. I looked back at Clara. Are you sure? I don't make mistakes in business, Clara said with a wink. And I have a feeling this is going to be the best hire I've ever made. What do you say? I picked up the paper. My hands were still a little rough. The grease stain on my dress was still there, but I didn't feel like a mess anymore. I felt capable. I felt seen. I say yes, I said. Clara raised her coffee mug. To new beginnings. We clinked our thick, white diner mugs together, the librarian, the billionaire, and the son who had found his way home. Later that night, after dropping Melvin off at a hotel, he decided to give Pearlie a night to cool off and think about her behavior. I finally drove into my own driveway. The house was dark and quiet. I walked inside and turned on the hall light. It was the same small house it had been this morning. The rug was still worn. The paint was still chipping a little in the corner. But as I looked in the hallway mirror, I realized something had changed. I looked at the woman staring back at me. She was tired. She was messy. But she wasn't invisible. For years, I had let the Vances make me feel like I was less than because I didn't have their money. I let them treat me like a second-class citizen because I drove an old car and bought my clothes off the rack. I thought class was something you bought. But tonight, I learned the truth. Class isn't about the label on your dress. It's not about the car you drive or the zip code you live in. Class is about what you do when no one is watching. It's about stopping in the snow when everyone else drives by. It's about standing tall when people try to make you feel small. I took the job offer out of my pocket and pinned it to the refrigerator with a magnet right next to a drawing my grandson made for me. I wasn't just Dana, the librarian, anymore. I wasn't just the unpaid babysitter. I was Dana Farrington, the woman who stopped. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait for tomorrow to start. It has been 4 months since the blizzard on Christmas Eve. The snow has melted in Asheville, replaced by the soft green of spring. The dogwood trees are blooming, and the air smells like wet earth and rain. My life looks very different now than it did when I was sitting in my car, terrified of a smudge of grease on my dress. I still drive my 2014 sedan. It still has the dent in the bumper. I still live in my small bungalow with the porch that needs painting. But when I wake up in the morning, I don't feel that heavy weight in my chest anymore. I don't feel invisible. I took the job with Clara. I started the first week of January. It hasn't been easy. In fact, it's some of the hardest work I've ever done. Being a community liaison isn't about sitting in an office. It's about being out there. I spend my days visiting families who have lost their homes to fires, helping single mothers navigate the nightmare of assistance paperwork, and sitting with seniors who just need someone to listen to them. Clara was right. A degree can't teach you how to hold the hand of a woman who just lost everything. Life teaches you that. And for the first time, all the struggles I went through raising 3 kids on my own, all the penny pinching, all the worry, it's all being used for something good. And Clara, she isn't just my boss. She's my Tuesday lunch date. Every week, we go back to the Red Booth Diner. We eat pie. We talk about our grandkids. She tells me about the headaches of high finance, and I tell her about the realities of the street. We balance each other out. She's given me confidence, and she says I've given her perspective. But I know what you're really wondering about. You're wondering about the Vances. We had Easter dinner at the mansion last week. Usually, holidays at the Vance estate are an exercise in anxiety. I would spend a week worrying about my outfit. I would walk in with my head down. I would let Mrs. Vance make her little comments about my practical shoes or my simple life. This time, I walked in wearing a bright yellow dress I bought with my first paycheck. I walked in with my head high. The change in the atmosphere was undeniable. When I walked through the door, Mrs. Vance didn't look at me like I was something she stepped in. She practically ran to greet me. "Dana," she chirped, her smile tight and anxious. "So good to see you. Here, let me take your coat. Can I get you a drink? We have that iced tea you like." She was terrified. She knows that I have Clara's ear. She knows that Clara canceled the investment deal, but she is terrified that if she crosses me, Clara might use her influence to blacklist the Vance family from other circles in town. Power is the only language Mrs. Vance speaks, And now that I have a powerful friend, she finally decided I was worth respecting. It's sad, really. We sat down to dinner, and the dynamic had completely flipped. Pearlie was polite, asking me questions about my job. "So, how is the foundation work going, Dana?" Pearlie asked, passing the rolls. "It sounds so fulfilling." "It is," I said, buttering a roll calmly. "We just helped a family of 5 get into a new apartment after their landlord evicted them illegally. It feels good to do work that actually matters." Pearlie nodded quickly. "Right, of course. That's wonderful." I looked at Melvin across the table. He looked relaxed. He wasn't hunched over his plate anymore. Since that night in the snow, he's been different. He stands up straighter. He sets boundaries with Pearlie. He comes over to my house on Sundays to watch football, and he doesn't ask for permission anymore. He realized that night that money doesn't make you a man. Integrity does. At one point during dinner, Mrs. Vance cleared her throat. "You know, Dana," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness, "I was thinking maybe you could bring Mrs. Wells to the summer garden party. We'd love to host her again. Under better circumstances, of course." The old Dana would have mumbled something polite. The old Dana would have tried to facilitate it, hoping for a crumb of approval. The new Dana just smiled. "I don't think so, Mrs. Vance," I said gently. "Clara is a very busy woman, and frankly, we usually spend our free time at places where we can just be ourselves. The garden party sounds a bit stuffy for us." Melvin choked on his water to hide a laugh. Mrs. Vance turned pink, but she didn't say a word. She just nodded and went back to her salad. I didn't say it to be mean. I just didn't need her validation anymore. I realized that her opinion of me never defined who I was. It only defined who she was. Driving home that night, I thought about all the women out there who feel like I used to feel. The women who are overlooked because they don't have the right last name or the right bank account balance. The grandmothers who are treated like unpaid help. The mothers who sacrifice everything and get no credit. I want to tell you something, and I want you to really hear me. Ladies, never let anyone make you feel small because you aren't wrapped in designer clothes. Never let anyone treat you like the help in your own family. True value isn't in the label on your dress. It isn't in the car you drive. It isn't in the size of your house. True value is in the heart. It's in the hands that stop to help a stranger in a storm. It's in the kindness you show when no one is watching. It's in the quiet strength it takes to keep going when the world tries to push you down. Mrs. Vance has millions of dollars, but she is poor in spirit. I might not have her money, but I have a richness she will never understand. I have self-respect. I have real friends. And I have the knowledge that when the test came, I didn't drive by. So, the next time someone looks down on you, you just lift your chin up. You smile. And you remember that diamonds are cold, but a good heart keeps you warm. And if you ever see someone stranded on the side of the road, stop. You never know. You might just save a life. Or, like me, you might just save your own. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.